Everybody hear me, even in the back? Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I made a brief announcement right after the Dhuhr prayer, and I'll just kind of add to that. I know there's some youth coming down after their meeting, but we're going to go ahead and begin. The talk here we put on is essentially sponsored by IGD and the book club. The book club has been present. Actually, Imam Muneer was one of the people that started a book club many, many years ago, and after he left, it kind of became defunct for a short time, and we started the book club back up again. And we do a book a month. We meet usually one weekend a month.
It's not working.
You need another more? There's more. And our topics are quite varied, but obviously we often kind of come back to Islam, Islamic history, religion, and politics. But that's not the limit of our book club. So Imam Muneer has kind of participated in some of the book clubs on a smaller scale in the past, and today we thought we'd have the opportunity. It's a holiday. I know a lot of people out of town, but we thought we would at least do this topic. We went over this book several months ago, but it created a lot of discussion, and so we thought we'd kind of re-present the book. The book is by Imam Muneer, who's a scholar. I actually can't remember where he teaches, but that's not the point. And so Imam Muneer is going to kind of use that book title as a topic of discussion. So also for those of you that want to listen to this, or family members, it's going to be posted at www.igd.net, and you can get a link to that. And IGD has its own YouTube channel too. So you're on YouTube. I'm going to get you the water.
I don't need it, right?
You don't need that, yeah, you have that.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Let me first make a confession. I have not even seen the book. I do know that it has something to do, or it has everything to do with Shiites and Sunnis. So, and I think my coverage of this particular topic will address the concerns raised by Professor Mahmoud Ayyub, who was formerly of Temple University, who replaced, if you can recall, the deceased Shaheed Professor Ismail Farouqi, who was killed in his bedroom. I've been involved in trying to understand the essential differences between Shiites and Sunnis for decades. And it is a very complex difference. On the one hand, we are brothers. On the other, we're more far apart than are Christians from us. So this is not a session for takfir. Nobody is calling other kafir. But we are very close to each other and very far apart. There are some things we agree on. And these are the three things that we agree on. I'm going to go through this. You can stop me anytime you want to. I'm going to reduce this to just one aspect here. This is a very long discussion. So we'll just do as much as is possible today. The three things that Sunnis and Shiites agree on is Allah, that He exists. That Muhammad, he is the messenger of Allah. And that the Quran is the word of Allah. These three things unite us and make us Muslims. The devil, however, is where? In the details. That's what separates us. That's what separates us. The primary areas, there are secondary areas, and you know, some of you have more first-hand experience living with Shiites than I do. You grew up in Hyderabad, some parts in Pakistan, lots and lots of Shiites, and so you kind of, you know, a certain religious osmosis takes place, and you absorb some of the ideas, not quite knowing the bigger picture. Here, I'm making an attempt to give you the big picture, and to go from there to what you understood to be a blameworthy Shiite belief, or if you're a Shiite, a blameworthy Sunni belief. So to understand why you would consider something blameworthy and they would not, or you would consider something noteworthy and they would not, you have to get the big picture. So you work from the outside to the inside. These are the main areas. First one is on Ali radiallahu anhu. Who is he? We have a major difference amongst us about who Ali really is. And it requires a whole session of at least 3 hours to understand those differences. They're very deep and complicated. They rattle everything that Sunnis believe in. You have a belief that the Anbiya and the Rusul are the greatest, this would shatter that. So if you've ever heard Shiites are wrong because they believe this, then know that some of it is true. But I'm not going to talk about that today. What is the Quran? Is the Quran the word of Allah in its entirety? Absolutely. Both Shiites and Sunnis accept that. But what is the Quran? At one point in time, it was the word of Allah revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Both parties agree to that. At one point in time, over 23 years, it was revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and both parties attest to that. But thereafter, they have differences of opinion about what constitutes the Quran. You and I, more you than me, some of you, have an understanding of the Quran that is not entirely the full understanding. And the reason you have this particular understanding is because it helps you become a better Muslim. And ultimately, this is what you want. It's like your relationship with food. You do know that a lot of this food has fecal matter in it, right? You realize that? Microscopic elements of fecal matter. You know what I'm talking about. But who really pays attention to that? Hyderabadi biryani bhai khalo. Because your job is to do what? Consume. So you don't get involved in issues that are biomedical in nature. But it's there. So the same applies to the Quran. Number 3 is a very fascinating discussion. And maybe if we have the time, we can go into it. This is a what-if discussion. And we're not talking about this today. What-if discussion. What if things had turned out? What if Muslim history had taken the route, the pathway that Shiites thought was best and not Sunnis? Get it now? It's a fascinating discussion. But we're not talking about it. The last one is the one we talk about. The Sahaba. You've heard a lot about this. So we'll spend today understanding why we consider them worthy of our respect, love, and so on, and whilst the companions, the Shiites consider them unworthy of such respect. That's a major area of difference. Whilst we may have we might have a quarrel with them with the Quran and with Ali and so on, I think, and you can share that with me, I think we suffer the most emotionally when the Sahaba are attacked. Nothing hurts most Sunni Muslims more than the attack of the Sahaba, especially the closest of the Sahaba, like Aisha. There are 3 or 4 targets of the Shia. Some of them consider these 4 targets to be non-Muslim. Most of them consider them to be Muslim. But the differences of opinion are stark. And the chief one amongst them is Aisha. I do know that Mahmoud Ayoub's book presents an opposite argument. Where's Nasser? He read the book and ran away. Oh, he's sitting there.
Yes.
He focuses primarily on the Sahaba, right?
He focuses on the Sahaba, yeah, that's
Okay, good. From a Shiite perspective.
That was the
He
debate.
is Shia, by the way. Mahmoud.
We figured.
Yeah, he's Shia. But he's an academic and he's very balanced in his approach. I mean, I'm a Sunni, so obviously I'm going to have a Sunni bias in this as well. And I've got an audience to tell me you better have this bias, otherwise you've got to leave your IGD. Okay, so this is, any questions so far? No. Alhamdulillah.
Is the other Shia?
Huh?
Is the other Shia?
Mahmoud Ayyub, yes. Mahmoud Ayyub is Shia. All right, so we've said this. Let's move on to the next thing. We all work with the basic premise. All of us work with certain premises. They're basic premises. We will operate with them. In science you might call it the givens. You know, you have the givens. So we have that in science, you have it in philosophy, you have it in religion. That's the basic premise. And this is the most important thing to understand to make sense of this conflict between Shia and Sunni. That's number one. The other thing you have to know is that when we divide human beings, we divide them, put them into two categories. We do this all the time. And we do that essentially based on that human being's proximity to us. The closer that human being is to us, the more likely him or she or her would be falling into one category rather than the other. All right? So what is this? The other one is, people are either incidentally good or essentially good. People are either, my spelling might be off here, I don't know. People might be incidentally good or essentially good. If you ask a Palestinian about a Jew, what is he most likely to tell you? Is a Jew essentially good or incidentally good? Let's go. Who's the man to answer that one? Quickly, quickly. No, you can't. You have. Then you have a problem with your own understanding of humanity. But if you ask a Palestinian, is a Jew essentially good or incidentally good? He just saved your life. You got knocked over. You got knocked over, right? And you had one of your arteries burst, and this guy had to fix you, and he did. Is he essentially good or incidentally good? Incidentally good. Or you could say asli and arzi. You understand the difference now? Is your mother essentially good or incidentally good? Essentially good, right. Now she's a prostitute. Everybody knows that. She's a prostitute. Is she essentially good or incidentally good? Essentially good. You don't know her. Haven't you heard that one before? Have you listened to a criminal's mother talk about him? A pedophile's mother talk about him. You don't know my son, he's a wonderful kid. He is a wonderful kid. He wouldn't harm a fly. Heard this one, right? This is how we bracket people. We do it all the time. We just don't realize it. Some of us have difficulty in doing this stuff. Perhaps a Pakistani is an Indian, Hindu particularly, but essentially good, incidentally good. Incidentally good. इनके रगों में व्यवस्थ है शिर्क. Right? So Now you understand that we're not guilty of this. This is just a human tendency. It's how we divide humanity. This is very, very important, because that becomes your point of departure. For a Shia, are the Sahaba essentially good or incidentally good? Incidentally good. For a Shia, the Sahaba are incidentally good.
Why the Sahaba?
We'll come to that now. That's a good question. So let's be Shia here and Sunni there, right? So Sahaba, incidentally good, essentially good. All right? Incidentally good, all of them? No. Ahlul Bayt, essentially good. Ahlul Bayt, essentially good. You see how this thing is breaking up now? Now you can understand that there's a great alim who reduced the Shiite belief towards the Sunni, towards the Sahaba, and says, وَأَمَّا الصَّحَابَةَ فَكَفَرُوهُ. As for the Sahaba, they apostatized them. He says, these people are not Muslim. So for the Sahaba, a companion has to prove that he is essentially good. For a Shiite, a companion has to prove that he is essentially good. And I'll show you how. For a Sunni, all companions are essentially good. For a Sunni, all companions are essentially good. Do you see the difference now? How does a Sahabi prove that he is essentially good and not incidentally good? By his love for Ahlul Bayt. There you go. You got it now? All Sahaba were incidentally good, except those who showed their undying love towards the Ahlul Bayt. For a Sunni, a Sahabi, you have been taught this since madrasa days, at very young age. You didn't realize what that meant. It had a huge meaning historically. Whatever you've learned in your imaniyat and things like that was all constructed because of this conflict. It was all constructed because of this conflict. You were taught that a Sahabi is who? Is one who, in the state of Iman, sees the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? That's the only requirement. He must be Muslim, and he must see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he gets the stamp of approval called Sahaba. You know, in Islam, in Sunni Islam, you're very critical about where you get your information. Very critical. And it's all based on one verse in the Quran. It's a very powerful verse. It anticipates the era of Donald Trump. It says, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. It says, when someone who is blameworthy, fasiq, comes to you, seek evidence, corroboration. He makes a particular statement, it has to be corroborated. You can't just accept something on face value, except for the Sahaba. This is the Sunni stand. So I want you to understand the weaknesses and the strengths on both sides. If a Sahabi says, I saw Rasulullah do so, or I heard him say so, no questions asked, it's correct. For a Shia, not acceptable. Who is he? Who is he? Because their basic premise, coming back, is what? Like all of us say, incidentally good or essentially good, says no, a Sahabi is incidentally good until proven otherwise. He has to prove his credentials. We say he doesn't have to prove anything. His mere presence in front of Rasulullah in a state of Iman gives him a state of approval. We have some problems with a Sahabi who is very old and he narrates a tradition. Then we are not impugning his character. We're just impugning his ability to transmit. The man is very old, he loses his ability to listen and things like that. Some consider that acceptable. Says, well, if a Sahabi is known to have narrated a tradition at an age which would make it very likely that he misheard something, then you can ignore his tradition. So we have certain criteria that we use to ignore a Sahabi's tradition, but never his character. Never his character. Now you also understand why we call ourselves what? Not just Sunnis, but what is our full name? We have a full title. Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Which Jama'ah is this? Jama'atul Sahaba. And Ahlus Sunnah means not just Ahlus Sunnah, but Ahlul Hadith. We are the followers of Hadith and the followers of the Sahaba. Those two things together are based on the idea that the Sahaba are essentially good. The Shiites do not reject Hadith, but they do not consider it the final word in any matter. So you'll find a Shia would quote a Sunni Hadith. That's not a validation of Sunniism. That's simply saying, you've got material there that we agree with. We can be picky about it. You cannot be picky about it. We can be picky about what we consider acceptable and not. You cannot be picky about it. You have to accept the whole corpus. Unless it's weak. Unless it is fabricated. You know those categories, right? If a hadith is weak or fabricated. But listen, you're not looking at the person who's narrating the hadith. Some of the scholars don't even allow you to look at context and look at whether this thing is applicable or not. No. If the Sahaba said so, they've got the stamp of approval, they are essentially good, the word is authentic, you have to accept it. Any questions so far? No.
So, as a historian, would you agree with either of these two assertions? Number one, that Shiism is sectarian. Is Sunniism also an articulation of a sect, or is it an umbrella, catch-all, whoever's remaining?
A sect is considered any group that deviates from an orthodoxy. An orthodoxy is something that the majority agree on. If the majority agree on three beliefs, like Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, for instance, then that becomes orthodoxy. That's all it means. Orthodoxy means right belief. Any group that breaks away from that is considered a sect. They're not outside Islam, but they're not inside this idea of being acceptable. So Sunniism, because of their numbers, became what? Orthodoxy. Sunniism becomes, because nobody actually tests Sunniism. It just grows. There are two things going in their favor. One is numbers, the other is political power. Lati. So it is through these two things that Sunniism grows and becomes the orthodoxy of Muslim history throughout. That's why I asked you the earlier question of the 3 or 4 things that we have to investigate. What if Islam had taken a path that was Shia inclined rather than Sunni inclined? History would have been very, very different. Some good, some not so good.
I mean, when you say Sahaba says something,
Lovely.
When you said Sahaba says something and it becomes automatically an authentic thing, there's a nuance to that because all the major Shaykh al-Hadith, they were very authoritative in investigating and getting multiple authentications of each of these, and they made sure and they categorized those hadiths be strong, weak, or possibly wrong.
Okay. I got some of what you, so you're saying that the Shaykh al-Hadith,
I mean, the four great Imams, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa,
okay.
they were, among others, they were very authoritative and investigative.
Yeah.
If they hear one hadith, they would find another source, a different source, to ensure that this is authentic versus this is weak and this is, possibly made up.
Well, they didn't do that. They came afterwards. The people who did that came afterwards. And those were the people known as Bukhari, Muslim. So you have two categories. Those who worked on the law and those who worked on the source of the law. Two different things. One is those who worked on the source of the law and those who worked on the law. You need the source for the law. And the sources came after, actually, than the law itself. And you say, but how is that? You're putting the cart before the horse. You say, but that's how human beings function. You know, we had cars moving on the road before we had traffic rules. The first traffic rule came about in England when you had the first traffic jam. You get the point. So in the same way, people had to know how to do things. And remember, we gave that stamp to who? Of being essentially good. That's a good question. Who did we give that stamp to? We only gave it to them backwards, retrospectively. We didn't start at the time of the Sahaba. Omar would ask someone, did you hear the Prophet say so? Say yes. He says, okay. But when Uthman radiallahu anhu died, when he was martyred, from that point onwards, there was, that came to be known in Islamic history as Al-Fitnatul Kubra, the big fitna. When Uthman was killed, and you know who killed him, right? Let's go back. In our terms of, in our hierarchy, who's right on the top? The Sahaba. Followed by the Tabi'i. Followed by the Tabi'i. There's no one after that, right? Osman was in the top category. So who do you think killed him? Category 1 and category 2. Sahabis and Tabi'is killed him. Yes, see? Now you have eyebrows going up. Ooh.
No, I mean, but I understood that there was no Sahabi.
Huh?
There was no Sahabi in the killing category.
Well,
Abu Bakr's son, but
his son was standing right there and he was about to do it. He said, your father has all respect for my beard. He said, oh, okay, let me go back. You understand? So they got very close to these things. So at that point, scholars realized you can't use that categories anymore. You have to filter it. And so they asked, where do you get it from? He said, I got it from Abdul Qadir. Okay, fine. That's good enough. Who did he get it from? So that began a chain. You know that chain of narrations that you talk about? It starts with the martyrdom of Uthman. And then it becomes a science. And it's a fascinating science. But it's not something that begins there at that time. Abu Hanifa is one of the earliest ones. That's why you find his entire school is more tilted towards having frameworks than having hadith. I'm digressing for one moment here. By what do you mean by that? For Abu Hanifa, you look at the Quran in particular, and you draw an image, you extrapolate. He says, what is Salah supposed to be like? So he says, Salah is supposed to be that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's what. So for instance, for Abu Hanifa, Inna salata kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta. Salah is to be performed at specific times in your salah. And that's in the Quran. Abu Hanifa will not shift from that, no matter what. Does that explain to you something now? What does it explain to you?
Shortening the prayer.
Yes. And more important than shortening the prayer? Combining the prayer. Because what he's looking at, he first created a framework. He says, when I take all the verses together and I look at this image, I see this is what Allah wants. He wants salah to be performed at specific times. He says, but there's a hadith. He said, no way. Again, I'm digressing somewhat. Basic approach, again, remember I said basic premise? The basic premise for the Quran is authenticity. Got it? What is the basic premise for hadith? Falsity. Totally opposite. You get the difference now? For the Quran, your basic premise that if somebody tells you this is the verse of the Quran, unless obviously you know it, what is it your duty to do? Accept. And if somebody tells you this is a hadith, your basic duty is to do what? Reject. Reject. Who was the biggest rejecter in the history of Islam? The history of Islam. The biggest rejecter. Al-ayadu billah. Astaghfirullah. Subhanallah. Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. Imam Bukhari was the biggest rejecter of hadith. So when you learn about hadith and you think about him compiling, how do you think he got to those 6,000 hadiths? By discarding 600,000. Nobody else has done that. Nobody else has done that. He discarded all of the hadith because how did he do that? Allah told him? No. Rasulullah told him? No. He drew a framework and he said, I cannot accept everyone's statements. So here's my rules. If you come to me with a hadith, I'm going to put it through this filter. Science, you do this flow chart. If A, then B, and C, and D, that's what he created. He basically created a flow chart. He takes the hadith that Atar al-Qadir narrates, and he brings it down. Yes, no, yes, no. At the end of the day, he says, okay, acceptable. So all of these things happen at that, I'll take a question now. All of these things happen at that point in time. So the basic premise, if your basic premise is that the hadith is inauthentic unless proven, that's why we say we have this, why do we don't call it hadith, we call them what? Sahih. As-Sahih, six authentic hadith books. Because we understand that this is something that has to be authenticated. So when the Hanafis insist on, at least those not living in America, on not joining their prayer or shortening their prayer, those not willing to join their prayer or shorten their prayer, they're looking at this particular perspective that says, no, it's the Quran that ultimately determines the way in which a salah is performed. Everything else has to move with it. Yes, sir.
You said Imam Bukhari rejected other hadiths. He did not do that. He just chose the 6,000 hadith sharif will be truly accepted by everybody. And I will tell why. The other hadiths, people let them. It's not only Sahih Bukhari, it's the hadith which Imam Bukhari narrated. There is other books of Imam Bukhari. He collected all those hadiths in other books. So we cannot say, the falsity of hadith sharif is rejection. That is a very dangerous statement.
I understand. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
You make clarification of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and you said Ahl Sunnah wal Ahl Hadith, and Jama'ah is the Sahaba. I never heard this before. Never. You are cutting off all scholars, you are cutting off all Muslims all over the history. And Rasulullah told us, لا تجتمع أمتي على ضلال. The whole nation of Islam are not gathered on a sin or on something wrong.
Okay, thank you.
So it is taken into consideration of al-Jama'ah means all the scholars of Islam, all over the history of Islam, and also what all the Muslims agree on, and we saw it good all over the history of Islam.
All right, let's take the second one first.
Ideas.
Can I explain that to you?
And I have one more after yours.
Okay. When you say that all the Muslims and all the ulama are part of the Jama'ah, they can only be part of the Jama'ah if they do what? No, if they tie themselves to who? The Sahaba. So it's not the, you understand it?
By all Muslims.
No, you asked the question, I answer it and we move on. So all the Muslims, just call it all the Muslims and all the ulama, they will, the only time they are considered part of the Jama'ah is if they can link themselves to who? The Sahaba. That's how they become Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. It starts from there. Because the ulama are not just Sunni ulama. The Shia have their own ulama. But they're not considered part of this because they don't tie themselves to Sahaba. We are not the only Muslims. Shias are also Muslim. But we don't consider them as Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah because they don't go to the sources through the Sahaba. And as for whether he rejected or not, absolutely he rejected. You might differ with that, but that's your opinion. Your third question.
There is also a tabi'een. And Rasulullah said, the best centuries of my ummah are the first 3 centuries. Sahaba and tabi'een.
Absolutely.
And the tabi'een in the 3 centuries are also considered to be Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So only because they follow Sahaba. It's the same. and we follow Sahaba because Sahaba they follow Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Please, can I ask my third question?
Yeah.
I don't know if you are making this as statement or you are teaching us to put people in 2 categories only, incidental, dairy, or essential. In the Masonic teaching, they say things are only black and white.
I don't know
In
anything about that.
Islam, they say no, there is varieties. Even our colors, we have the very dark black and the small white people. But this is not the only people in the world. There is different shades, like my color, this color, tan color. And in Quran Kareem, Allah said about Ahlul Kitab, وَإِنَّ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ مَنْ تَأْمَنْهُ عَلَى قِنْطَارٍ يُؤَدِّيهِ إِلَيْكَ ومن أهل الكتاب من لو أنت أمنه على دينار لا يؤديه إليك إلا ما دمت عليه
قائم.
Which means there are good people in Ahl al-Kitab. It doesn't mean I will categorize them only black and white. Only those who went astray, like Wahhabis, like Shia, they categorize people only in 2 colors, black and white.
Okay. Thank you very much.
If in Saudi Arabia, can I ask one more thing? In Saudi Arabia, when they chose this Khawarij idea and this bad belief, you see all men wearing white, all women wearing black. Because this is their idea. Life is only black and white. So please don't categorize all Muslims, all humanity, only these 2 categories.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
So it's interesting because you're reflecting on certain modern historians' thoughts on how things happen. But as early or late, depending if you're looking back or forward, Dahabi is criticizing Abu Hanifa for his hadith knowledge. So given the tangent you slightly went on as well, that Fuqaha versus Ahl al-Hadith, there are some historical arguments that, wait, don't get confused. Abu Hanifa and Imam Shafi'i do not have different sets of hadith. It's one corpus, and it's much more interpretive methodology difference than it is actually textual difference. So, do you see, I guess what I'm trying to understand is the argument compelling that there's one corpus, different interpretation, or is it actually no, each person has a different subset of the corpus?
It's both actually. It's both actually. There's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which I always quote. It says, إِذَا بَلَغَ الْمَاءُ قُلَّتَيْنِ فَلَمْ يَحْمِلْ الْخُبْثِ. That if water reaches 2 qullas, let's just say that I don't know exactly what the modern numbers would be. If it reaches the next number, then that water is pure, regardless of what falls in it, on condition that the three basic qualities of water do not change. A, B, C, taste, color, and smell. And Abu Hanifa puts that hadith on one side. People don't like the word reject, so they put it on one side. So he puts it on one side, and he has an argument for that. But again, always when you're looking at the Hanafi school, always think of a frame, an intellectual frame, and everything has got to fit in it. If it doesn't fit in it, it's thrown out.
So grammar came first, right?
No, he's the guy sitting there and telling you, I'm creating the grammar for you. Everything is out, you're doing things, but I'm creating the grammar for you. When hadiths came in there, huge numbers, Then the Hanafis got scared. He says, yo, astaghfirullah, Rasulullah said this, and big difference between Rasulullah saying something and a hadith saying something. When Rasulullah says something, it is the final word, if he's present. But if he's out there, then somebody says, he said it, he says, who said it? He said it, okay. He said it? No. You understand? We'll talk about that later. So you got this. Let's move on to the categories that were created afterwards. And these categories you are familiar with. Munafiq, Mu'min, and Kafir. Now the last category is not difficult to understand because it's an open declaration. I don't believe in Allah, or I don't believe in the Quran, I don't believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not difficult to categorize someone because he is or she is making an open declaration. Right? Mu'min, somewhat more difficult. Because it's the inner condition of that person's heart. See the difference? If someone says, I'm a mu'min, then you have to accept him on face value until you find compelling evidence to the contrary. The problem you have is in the munafiq. Because he makes this statement and he might actually be here. Or he makes this statement and he's not certain if he accepts all of it. So that's the munafiq. Right? Both schools accept that they were mu'min and kafirs and munafiqs. The difference, however, is this. That we leave out the kafir because he's not problematic. If this is the bulk of all the Sahaba who existed at that time, for a Shia, these are the mu'mins. And the rest of them were? Munafiq. For the Sunni, these are this number, it's a receding number. Well, let's call this the Shia, and this is for the Sunni. For a Sunni, it works like this. It says, Mu'min, and then this line starts moving this way. Until the Rasulullah's death, what happens? What happens in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death? The line itself collapses. Remember what I said? That what is our belief with regard to the Sahaba? As-Sahabatu kulluhum adul. They're all fair-minded, balanced. That is something that came about after Rasulullah passed away. So this was a moving line. It disappeared when Rasulullah died. Remember I told you earlier on, you believe that all the Sahaba are equally acceptable? When did that happen? Not when Rasulullah was alive. Because you still had the problem of the munafiq. The Quran is replete with verses that speak about nifaq. So clearly it was a massive problem at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But as soon as he closes his eyes, the line collapses. Shiites have a big problem with that. Shiites have a big problem with that. They said, how did the line just collapse? How did the line just collapse? You understand? Your question?
The definition of kafir, the people who were believed the Jews and Christians at the time, were they all considered kafir?
No. That's a different category. We're talking about the problem of the Arabs in Makkah and Medina. So we know that in Medina, the primary problem was not, in Makkah, the primary problem was kufr. In Medina, the primary problem was nifaq. So if nifaq was such a big problem, how did this thing suddenly disappear? The line of demarcation that separated the munafiq from the mu'min, how did it disappear?
Shifted.
Huh?
It shifted.
How did it shift? What happened? What caused it to shift? That's the question they ask.
There is an answer for it, may I say?
No. You have one or two questions, that's all. Otherwise, you're going to be dominating the entire conversation, and I'm not going to allow that. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Can I say something before I go?
Absolutely, say what you have to.
You are really misleading. So,
Alhamdulillah, I've done it for the past 15 years now.
what Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah also says. I would say this man from Ahlul Bayt. And I will make a request for the administration not to invite such speakers like you and invite two scholars, especially Ahlul Bayt. So you are not putting poisons in the mind and the heart of Muslims.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Before,
Sit down. Brothers. Thank you very much. Come on. Right, next person.
go and read his biography.
No, brother, turn around. Turn around.
The word Udud just say in Islam is completely different. Even Munafiq cannot lie on Sayyidina Muhammad. So when they say Udud, doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. It means you do not lie when you make an allegation of Sayyidina Muhammad. Even Munafiq cannot lie on Sayyidina Muhammad.
Brother, you had your saying. I'm asking you nicely. Please leave.
So you are mixing orange with apples.
Yes.
No, I have a appointment. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. And also that will be my car on the side so I can get in there and get out quickly. Okay, so you understand what you see clearly if you had a munafiqun, the nifaq issue in the Quran is well. You may not know Arabic, but if you read the Quran, you hear it's all munafiq, and then suddenly Rasulullah is gone, nifaq is gone. Because Sunnis required a category of people that they accepted as being trustworthy. They had a system that they had created at the bottom. If they took that system up all the way to the top, they'd have a serious problem. You see, one of the issues that you have in trying to understand this is that we tried so hard for, ever since some of you are 70 years old, 80 years old, to give you a positive picture of the Sahaba and that era, is that everything was whitewashed. And so when you have to come to terms with this, it's suddenly it's like somebody slapping you. And you're not the first person who got slapped. I did. And not at universities here, at the Darul Uloom itself. Oh, I didn't know this happened. Really? This is what happened with Ali and Aisha? I had no idea. I had no idea. This is what happened with Fatima and Abu Bakr. I'm sitting in the dars and listening to the Shaykh, and he's teaching me this stuff, and it's in Bukhari and in Muslim, and it's like somebody slapping me. The reason for that is because you've been given Islam for consumption purposes, which is good. You're supposed to use it, eat it, and move on. But you're not living in that kind of an environment. You're living in an environment that is contested. People are arguing about this, discussing it. You go to university campus, you teach your kid, mashallah, you send them here, and they've learned everything, and they go first day at school, mashallah, I've got Nasreen as my roommate. Baba, I got Nasreen as my roommate. Evening time comes, salah time, you suddenly read, oh, Nasreen's making salah differently. And as time goes by, you find Nasreen actually believes slightly differently and so on. So you have to prepare for that. You have to prepare for that. You have to be ready for that. And it makes you stronger. It makes you stronger. So there we have it. So this munafiq, mu'min, kafir category, for Shiites, the number of munafiqs is so big. For Sunnis, it is that big. And after the death of Rasulullah, it disappears. And we don't have an answer for that. Because the answer is really difficult to accept. In the life of the Prophet, they had munafiqs. All it did was for Rasulullah to leave, and what happened to nifaq? You see the point now? a very uncomfortable conclusion you reach. During the entire 10 years in Makkah, there was no, nifaq was a massive problem. Rasulullah lived and mashallah, no more nifaq. It's gone. Can't be. It cannot be. Be good. Loudly, can't hear you.
What are the, I guess, thought process in the collection of people who murtad and either come back or not?
What are the selection criteria?
How do Sunnis think about maybe murtad who leave and come back? This question, who is an hypocrite and who is not or whatever.
You mean at that time?
At this time.
No, I don't want to confuse this time with that time because there's a whole different argument. Here we simply came to a conclusion. When I say we, I mean our Islamic scholars came to a conclusion that in order to protect this edifice that is Islam, we have to conclude that the Sahaba are all good people.
But the Sahaba themselves, I don't think they made that conclusion because
They did? You want what?
I don't think the Sahaba made that. I mean, people after the Sahaba might have made.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I would go so far as to say that your painful experience over these 4 or 5 years that you've had is a fair reflection of life at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba. You were doing good if you had the right niyyah. If you did it for the right reason and you had a difference of opinion with your brother and you respected him and you still continue to respect him and you continue to greet him, you're good to go. But if you shut up at that time and you say, no, jane do. No, can't do that. You cannot say jane do. It's a very tough thing to do, but that's Islam. You have to say, no, I disagree with you. And I disagree with you. And I disagree with you. And I disagree with you. But I love you and respect you. You do both at the same time. You have to do both at the same time.
People are able to difficult both.
Huh?
People are able to difficult both. If you disagree, then you're very difficult time loving that person.
No, yeah,
That's what's going on.
No, then you have to find someone who can help you go through this. You need someone who can help you go through this, yes.
So it's interesting, the argument you're making. If I'm understanding it, you're saying that for all of us who are reading the Quran, we hear Munafiqun, and we naturally ask, how come God or the Prophet didn't identify who the Munafiqun are? Now we're like, oh, interpret historians like yourself are telling us there's a reason for it. There's providence in our history, because that allows the ikhtilaf of should I or should I not take this report. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. For the Shia, hypocrisy is very easily identified. For the Sunnis, it is impossible to identify. For the Shia, anyone who opposed Ali and opposed the household of Ali is a munafiq. For a Sunni, there is no answer as to who is a munafiq. Got that? Yeah. Loudly, yeah?
For Shia, it's very easy to identify who is Munafiq.
Identify.
Yeah, identify. So, and you said that one of the definition is if they don't away perfectly, right?
If they oppose Ali.
Oppose Ali as issue, category issue, and Ola, because they have different terms they use. With Sunni, we don't oppose him, that we still categorize him as a Hafi, we have all the respect for him, everything, but which opposition you're coming from?
The big ones. And we'll talk about that. Now let's move on to the individuals and that will answer your questions. There are 4 individuals that Shiites target for criticism and that causes tremendous pain among Sunnis. One is Abu Bakr, the second is Omar, the third is Uthman, and the fourth is Aisha. There are others also, but these are the primary targets of the Shias. And they don't do this in order to cause you pain necessarily. I mean, you might have a private argument with your neighbor and he doesn't. But essentially, they consider that Muneer Farid's question of what if, remember that question I asked? He said that question was derailed because of these four people. For them, it's very clear that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had, you see, I can't even use a proper word here. I can't say appointed because he didn't. Designated, he didn't. There's no evidence to show. But he was looking at Ali when he was looking at succession. I think that's good. He was looking at Ali when he was looking at succession, and he kept looking at Ali when he was looking at succession. Throughout his life, he was looking at Ali when he was looking at succession. There's no doubt, at least in my mind, that he had in his mind Ali when he was looking at succession. That's only my opinion. I don't give too many opinions, but this is one of them. I have almost no doubt that when Rasulullah looked at Ali, he looked at successor. Didn't say it. He didn't say it. Now,
So the author in this book kind of refers exactly to that point that you're making, that it wasn't directly stated, but it was referred to. And he uses the, somebody that read the book can kind of correct me,
yeah.
he uses that as the kind of the
That's the pivotal argument.
Right, and ironically in our book discussion, one of the points that we kind of found interesting is I think he struggled making any really harsh statements about individuals, specifically Abu Bakr, but when you get to like Hazrat Usman, I mean, it really, like, everything kind of crumbles. And from a Hanafi, or Sunni, perspective, that's when you really kind of start to lose the screws, so to speak, because that's where you really have to struggle with.
So, okay, let's lose the screws then.
Yeah.
Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu fell foul of Shiite sympathies because of two factors. One minor and one major. The minor one was that he was appointed Khalifa. And understand one thing, that there are Shiites. There's a Shia Sheikh who's called Yasser Habib, Sheikh Yasser Habib. He's Kuwaiti. He's been exiled, he's been sent, not allowed to return to Kuwait. And like good exiles everywhere, where do you think he ends up? In London. So he's got his base in London. And every time he makes salah, he makes qunut. And generally the qunut is supposed to be positive. But there are times where Rasulullah made a qunut where he cursed certain groups. So when he makes his qunut, he curses. Who do you think he curses? Aisha. He curses Aisha. Yes. So that's one extreme. And then there are others who are very, very, they agree with me entirely. And they will agree with my description of the differences they have with the Sahaba. But they will not go so far as to call them being unworthy even. So they're respectful, and they fully understand that Aisha is the mother of the faithful, and so on. So there's a great deal of balance in the Shiite community. Great deal of balance. But in our community, it's always the tail that wags the dog. Yes. You know how many Taliban there are, or ISIS people there are. And you realize you spent the last 10 years of your life trying to undo what they've done. That's all you've done. I can recall the moment and the time. In Ann Arbor, the night before 9/11, I gave a talk. David Barnier was sitting next to me, and I spoke about the glory of Islamic civilization. There's no place to give that talk anymore. No place to talk about it. I was speaking specifically about Spain and how we created a society at that time. The next morning this happened. So too often it's the tail that wags the dog, in Shiism and in Sunnism as well. So in regard to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and this is a very important point for Sunnis to understand, And it is not just his appointment, it is what Omar said at that time. Very important for us to understand this, and therefore understand why the Shiites believe that the appointment itself was wrong. Omar, in his words, says, كانت بيعة أبي بكر فلتة. Our paying allegiance to Abu Bakr was done in hastiness. This is Omar speaking. It was done hastily. It had to be done. It's like a patient who's in the trauma unit, and you have to just put anything on there to close the bleeding. And what was the bleeding in this case? It was the community splitting up. Remember, this was a community that was put together by Rasulullah, comprising firstly of Arabs of Mecca and Arabs of Medina. And when Rasulullah passes away, the Arabs of Medina now believe that this is our city, we're the host, and therefore authority should be with us. And the only reason they lost that argument, is because they split amongst themselves. The Arabs of Medina were two major tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj. And Abu Ubaidah was appointed as the leader from the Aus. So you know what the Khazraj said? No way. No way. So on the first, you have one conflict about whether it should be Makki or Madani. Second conflict, whether it should be Aus Madani or Khazraji Madani. At that point, Abu Bakr, Omar saw his opportunity. He saw his opportunity. You know, Marshall Hodgson was a professor who died. He wrote a classic book. It's in 3 volumes. It will drive you crazy. It's so dense and thick and unreadable, but I would urge you to read it. I think I've recommended this book so many times, so many different places. It's in 3 volumes. It's about the venture of Islam. And he says Islam really rests on the shoulders of 3 people. For us, it rests on the shoulder of just one person. But he says 3 people. He says one is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, the other is Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, and the third is Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. It was Omar's brilliance at that time, where he saw that this Rasulullah gave us Iman and he gave us Ummah. Iman still resides in our heart, but at that point, at the drying shed of the Banu Saqif, at that point, Ummah was coming apart. So he went up and he took Umar Abu Bakr's hand and he said, I pledge allegiance to this man. So what do you think everybody else? Okay. He said, okay, let's go. That's how Abu Bakr became Khalifa. Everything else happened afterwards. He said when Rasulullah was sick, he made him Imam of the Salah and things like that. That's not argument enough. Shiites have much stronger arguments. That point, Omar saw that this division is going to destroy Rasulullah's second aspect of the legacy, which is the Ummah. And he says, I bid allegiance, or I pledge allegiance to this man, and he became Khalifa. And he was right for several reasons. Abu Bakr was the right person. Senior most, closest to the Prophet ﷺ, and he was not directly amongst the leadership of the tribes. He was part of a smaller group. So a compromised candidate. That's how he became Khalifa. But that's not the main reason. The main reason was when he became Khalifa, Fatima radiallahu anha, and she was a brilliant woman who in many ways embodied the spirit of her father. But she was also her own person. So here's the other thing, you grow up and you say, Sahaba, mashallah, look how they got along, they had such a wonderful life, and you make dua for them, say, radiallahu anhum, all of that is good. But what that does to you, it takes away from their own personalities and their own differences. When after Rasulullah died and Abu Bakr was appointed Khalifa, she stopped speaking to him till she died. She only lived 6 months, but for that entire period, she stopped speaking to Abu Bakr. Because Abu Bakr was Khalifa. But what made it worse is she went to Abu Bakr and he says, you ought to give me 1/5 of the war booty, because the Quran says that the khums must go to the household of the Prophet, and then he would distribute it. And you have to give me the land of Fadak, a place called Fadak. So he realized, oh my God, this is a problem for me now. Fortunately for him, there were companions who said, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that we, nahnu ma'ashara anbiya, we, the union of the anbiya, we do not inherit. Whatever belongs to us goes to the Baytul Mal. She obviously didn't accept it. And so she died without ever speaking to him. Without ever speaking to him. And for that entire 6-month period, Ali just stood behind her. He did not give allegiance to Abu Bakr either. Huh?
He didn't speak to him either.
I don't know if he spoke to him or not, but he did not even.
That 6 months coincides with, I mean, he didn't give bay'ah until
For that 6-month period.
for that 6-month period.
So this was one of the primary reasons why Shiites object to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Let's move on. Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar is a much more difficult person. When Rasulullah says, لو كان من بعدي نبيا لكان عمر, if there was a Nabi after me, it would be Umar. I would think, and how am I to speak on behalf of the Prophet, that it was Umar's just his super intelligence and his willingness to take on authority. Now Shiites, even humble Shiites and middle of the road Shiites, they have serious doubts about whether Umar was a Muslim or not. Let me repeat myself. Even middle of the road Shiites have serious misgivings about whether Umar was a Muslim or not. And the stories that you grew up with are the very stories they look at, and they say, no Muslim can ever do that. No Muslim can ever do that. You know the Hudaybiyah incident? When the whole group was going for Umrah and they were withheld, the person who stood up and says, I'm not giving in here, he is the messenger of God, and who are they? Why are we signing this? For Shiites, that's a clear violation of his allegiance to Rasulullah. Right there and then he's done. You understand the point they're making? For you, that was a wonderful thing. MashaAllah, Umar, you know, his love and his respect. But no. This man has got the gall to object to what the Prophet himself said. Ali did something similar, but it was clearly one of love and compassion. When Rasulullah, when Ali wrote down Min Muhammad Rasulillah to somebody else, I forget the person's name now, so the opposition from the kuffar objected. And so Rasulullah says, okay, Ali, get rid of it. He said, I can't get rid of it. Erase it. He said, I cannot erase it. So he said, all right, show me where it is. I will erase it. That's slightly different. But here, Umar is going around among the companions and says, what is going on here? Alasna al-haq, are we not on the right? So there's clear evidence that Rasulullah wants something and Umar is diametrically opposed to that. In a sense, I'm glad the man is not here. Let me take you to the next one, which is even more damning. Before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam leaves this world, he takes very ill, probably influenza or something. High temperature which makes you groggy and so on. And if a Shiite was here, he would object to me saying this. He would object strenuously. He says, you can't say that about Rasulullah. Groggy. And for us, it's a medical condition. Right? You get temperature goes up too high. So he asked for a pen and a paper. He wants to write down something. Listen to this one carefully. All of these things are all authenticated stuff. He says, give me a pen and paper so I can write down. And Umar says, don't give it to him. Umar says, don't give it to him. Kafana al-Quran. The Quran is enough for us. I can see your faces. I can see your faces. Tell me, whoa, Umar, what is going on here? I can see it. You don't have to tell me a word.
The Prophet could read or write, so
Huh?
the Prophet could read or
He's not
write.
going to write it himself. He's going to dictate, and people are going to.
We knew that he did that, but we didn't think beyond that.
Yes. He says, وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ. Obedience to Allah and obedience to His Messenger. But the relationship of Rasulullah to his companions was a complicated relationship. That's the most important thing to understand. His relationship with his companions was not, and I say this repeatedly, I said it in DC the last time I was here, we think of Rasulullah in front of his companions like the Sheikh of a Sufi tariqah with all his people in front of him. You know how that goes, right? Sheikh Saab is singing his zikr and all the Sufis are going left and right. Right? Sheikh Saab says, I'm tired, everybody gets up. Sheikh Saab says, go left, everyone goes. No. That was not the relationship of Rasulullah with his companions. I just told you earlier on that, at my humble opinion, Rasulullah looked at Ali as his successor. Never mentioned it openly. Never mentioned it openly. If you really want to appreciate a relationship, you must carefully study the relationship of Ali and Muhammad. It is a beautiful, fantastic relationship. I wouldn't go so far as to say what the Shiites say about Ali, but really he was outstandingly superb human being.
He was very young at that time.
He was an outstandingly superb human being.
So what refrained the Prophet from announcing this, proclaiming?
Whatever he wanted throughout his, because he understood, this is a coalition that I put together, and I've got to keep them together. This is a coalition I put together, and I've got to keep them together. Some of them are totally dedicated to me and my message, and some of them are totally dedicated to the message, not so much to me. Now for you, it's a shocker, it's true. Some of them were totally dedicated to the message, not to the Prophet. So it's a complicated relationship. It plays itself out over. Go back now that I told you this, go and read the Quran slowly. Those who read in Arabic, who read the translation, and you will see there, it's, when Rasulullah is being given tasalli, when he's being given comfort, it's because of this pressure on him. It's this pressure on him of keeping the community together. That fight between the Banu Umayyah and the Bani Hashim, those two major clans of the Quraysh, that fight didn't disappear. Rasulullah died. What happened to the fight? Up it comes again. Here's my point to you. Rasulullah dies at 2 o'clock. At 2:30 the fight starts again. What do you think he was doing for the past 40 years or 23 years of his life? Putting a lid on it. How hard is it to put a lid on a boiling pot? So when you think about Rasulullah and the sacrifices he made so that you and I can sit here, don't underestimate. I think this is where the ulama go wrong. When they play down the challenges he faced with his wives, with his own family, with the clans, it was enormous. It was enormous. And he kept it together. He kept it together. I just told them about the Aus and the Khazraj jockeying for power. Rasulullah just leaves the world. By the way, all of this is taking place, and guess what hasn't happened yet? Rasulullah has not been buried. He was buried almost 2.5 days after he passed away. Almost 2.5 days after he passed away.
Because they want to have Khalifa before you bury.
So many things going on. So many things going on. What comes out clearly is the quality of the Prophet ﷺ and some of his closest companions, and Ali being one of them. Ali was an amazing human being. His wife had a difference of opinion of Abu Bakr, he just stood behind her. When I said he stood behind her, in other words, she calls the shot and he listens. That's what I meant by it. She called the shot and he listened. Ali, you don't go and talk to the man. Yes, ma'am. That's what he was. This was the same Ali who broke down the door of the fort, remember? In Khaybar. There you go. Same Ali. Fatima tells him this, and he says yes. So that's his. So Umar radiallahu anhu comes in for particular criticism. Uthman is a figure that the both parties grudgingly agree. The only reason they don't talk about it is because they accept all the companions as being honest and reliable and trustworthy. But remember when Maulana Maududi wrote his book Khilafat al-Mulukiyat, he came under great criticism because he pointed out the weaknesses in the Khilafah period of Uthman, where the Banu Umayyah gained certain advantages. That's clear. I think most of you know that period, right? Where land that belonged to the state was given to the Banu Umayyah so they could let their animals feed on it. So there are several incidents in the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu that had made him the target. But Aisha radiallahu anha, she is an amazing figure. These people were not, I think one thing if you get out of your mind, they were not the murids of a sheikh. Get that out of your mind. Pir Sahib said something, let's do it. Not them. These people had personalities and characters and they stood by it. And sometimes they were quite sneaky. And the Quran bears testimony to that. Quran bears testimony to that. So Shiites are of the view that she is the mother of the faithful. A small minority says no, she is clearly a hypocrite. She is clearly a hypocrite. And the Quran chastises her for that, and it does. Not for being a hypocrite, but for acting in ways that were harmful to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's the honey story in the Quran. The honey story. And these are the two daughters of the two companions who became the first and the second Khalifa of Islam. Abu Bakr's daughter and Umar's daughter, Hafsa. They had a problem with Rasulullah going to another wife. And so they made up the story. At one level, it's a very silly story. I mean, totally inconsequential. He went to the house of the wife. He had some honey there, and he came back. And then Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her. May Allah be pleased with her. She contrived with Hafsa to give Rasulullah the impression, that he had bad breath. So he comes back from there, and she tells him, "Your breath smells foul. Did you eat some honey at her place?" He said, "Oh my God, I'll never do that again." You heard that very powerful verse upon which Islamic law is based. Abu Hanifa's law is based, "Lima tuharrimu ma ahallallahu lak." This is that silly little incident that caused it to be revealed. The verse itself is very powerful. Talking directly to the Prophet ﷺ, says, you do not have the right to make halal that which Allah has made haram, or to make haram that which Allah has made halal. Very powerful verse. Very powerful. Incident that actually prompted its revelation, this small little incident. Because she said, I'm not going to eat honey anymore. Why aren't you going to eat honey anymore? It gives bad breath, you can't do that. It's halal. But the person who instigated that particular incident is Aisha. So the Shiites they will simply point to that and says, look man, look what she's been doing. She's been doing things that are clearly condemned in the Quran. And then there is the incident of after Rasulullah leaves the world, and Uthman is assassinated, Ali becomes Khalifa, Muawiyah is the governor of Damascus. He refuses to accept Ali as Khalifa until Ali avenges the death of Uthman. All of the stuff is going on. And Aisha agrees with Muawiyah. She puts together a huge army and they do battle with Ali. That battle came to be known as the Battle of the Camel. As far as the Shiites are concerned, anyone who opposes a rightly selected Khalifa is a murtad. Is a murtad. So these are some of the reasons why the Shiites have a different take on who is worthwhile or worthy and who is unworthy. Remember, coming back to my earliest point, we generally, and I said generally, this was not making people black and white, we just have a human tendency that when we look at people, we say, well, yeah, he's a good person. Doesn't matter how bad he may have acted at a certain time. To give you a different analogy, human beings are able to separate when they look at another human being, they say that human being is a forest. But there are some bad trees in that forest. But we accept the forest as good. Other human beings don't see it that way. He's not a forest. He's a weed patch. And if you find a few good plants in that weed patch, it doesn't change the complexion of the weed patch. It remains a weed patch. That's a common tendency. Very common tendency. So when they look at the Sahaba, they're looking at weed patches except for those people who show that they're actually healthy forests because they are in keeping with Ali radiallahu anhu. So that is an overview of this whole discussion about the Sahaba. Two concluding points I want to make. And it's tied to this weed patch and forest quote that I gave you. What Sunnis have done, let me take you back to something that you've also learned in madrasa. We consider the Prophet ﷺ to be, and the word is ma'asum, right? He is ma'asum. Shiites go back, we say he's ma'asum anil ithm, not ma'asum anil khata. In other words, he is infallible in terms of sins, but he is fallible in terms of human error. He can and has made mistakes. Shias don't accept that. That's a minor problem. All other human beings are considered musib and mukhti. Can be right, he can be wrong. What we as Sunnis have done, however, is we have given the Sahaba the stamp of ma'asumiyat. If you ask me and I ask you, you say, no, we know that. We know that only the Anbiya are ma'asum. But in our dealings with the Sahaba, we behave like they're all ma'asum. Come again?
The way we treat them.
The way we treat them as if they are ma'asum. There's a difference between critiquing someone respectfully and impugning that person because he made a mistake. Or even because he sinned. We are mature enough to make that. We have terms for the ghalti ho jati. Remember that one? Because we understand that these people do make mistakes. But in our relationship to the companions, we consider them, we don't believe that it is the case. But our relationship with them is such that they are given that stamp of infallibility. That is a major weakness in our understanding. On the Shiite side, they do not look at the overall character and history of a person. They look at specific incidents. like the Omar incident with the piece of paper. We don't have an answer to that. We have to either keep quiet or we have to agree with them and say, yeah, Omar shouldn't have done that. And I'm not saying this. One great alim of Islam called Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi, he says Omar was clearly wrong. Omar was wrong. They should have given him the paper. He doesn't have the right to do that. So the best of our scholars have also agreed with that. But when they pass judgment on Omar, they don't look at that paper incident. See my point? They look at Omar from the time he accepted Islam to the time he died. They look at Omar as to the legacy he left behind, the sacrifices he made for Islam, the value that Islam gained because of him. And that's Omar. All the more is the case with people like Aisha. And of course, Aisha has a divine stamp on her. Allah Himself endorses her as being the mother of the faithful. So the Shiite problem, and Shiites acknowledge this, those who are more balanced, they acknowledge it, that you have to look at a person in a broader perspective. Cannot be picking on certain events and incidences and then painting that person with that particular brush. We hardly ever do that, except if that person is incidentally good. If we consider someone incidentally good, then we say, yeah, nothing counts for it. But if we believe, like all human beings do, that people are essentially good, I think that's a healthy approach that we have, part of our fitrah. Then we say, if people make a mistake, let's on the balance of evidence, what conclusion would you draw? So inshallah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. If you have any comments, questions? Yes?
Is there a difference between what the Shia think the family of the Prophet and the Sunni think what the family of the Prophet?
Yes.
Are the Ummul Mu'mineen part of the Ahlul Bayt according to Shia?
Shia are right and we are wrong. Two things about the Shia. As far as the Shia-Sunni difference is concerned, they know 10 times more than you and I do. Yes. They know 10 times more. And the easiest way to understand that, as far as slavery in America is concerned, blacks know 100 times more than whites do. Yes. Right or wrong? Yes. Why? Because they are the ones who are persecuted. Their bodies have the scars of that particular event. The same applies to the Shia. We are the victors. We wielded control of the Ummah. So we can say very categorically, Jane do. Jo hua so hua. They will not say that. They won't say that. As far as they're concerned, he says, when Rasulullah took his family for mubahala, when the Christians were asked to go with him to see who's right, this divine test, he took his Ahlul Bayt. And there was no other wife there. There was Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Ali radiallahu anhu, and the kids.
They take it from there.
Yeah, and they have, this is the strong one I'm giving you. They have other arguments as well.
A lot of people.
Loudly.
1 second.
Label, a lot of people label each other prophets. Sunni could do for Shia, the Shia could do for Muslim, the Sunni. So, what do you think about this problem?
That is true. That is true. But I think what has happened in the past 50 years is you've had this demographic intermingling. Whereas previously, Shiites were on that side of the world, Sunnis were in this side of the world, except perhaps in parts of Lahore or in Hyderabad. And therefore, we were able to live with each other. But then suddenly we just get thrust against each other. And when that happens, then you start asking myself, well, who am I? And why am I not like you? And if I'm not like you, who's right? Are you right or am I right? And so that created the tension. And I think we've handled it very well. We've handled it. Understand that when you have this kind of demographic turbulence, when people are shifted from place to place, it's not just human beings who clash with each other, ideas clash with each other, beliefs clash with each other, until people settle down and says, okay. The one thing that, when I look at Pakistani media and I look at the newspapers and things like that, the one thing that really gives me hope for that country, apart from the fact that they didn't do badly in the World Cup, is the fact that nobody wants what is called firqa wariya. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants to have this kind of sectarian antagonism. They have TV shows in which they get multiple people to sit down of different schools, and they discuss the hottest topics, and they do it quite well. They do it quite well.
Why don't
So
scholars discourage this tendency?
these are all scholars who are doing it. And if you know the scholars who are engaged in this, these are the very scholars who engaged previously in these debates that went on, the munazaras. And they've come to realize that ultimately, the one thing that binds Pakistan is Pakistan itself. That's the one thing I've been paying attention to the country itself. They love their country. Everyone does, without exception. They all love it. And they want the best for their country. The only problem is they want more for themselves than they want for their country. That is their problem. They want more for themselves than they want for their country. But in terms of their loyalty, they love it.
But don't, like in this kind of lecture, you should clarify to people that this should not be done, calling each other kafirs.
I don't think anybody here does that.
No, I think this is very common, goes on. But what I'm saying is, this fellow yourself and others, they should...
No, absolutely. I think I made the point.
That,
I mean, you're serious about this. So I'm making it very, very clear that yes, there is no room for this kind of talk. Absolutely no room. I'm giving you so many examples to show you that, I mean, in a country that has all the reason to get into fights because of this, people are trying, and the school I belong to is a very conservative school, the Deobandi school, and they were the ones who stand up and said, no, we have to stop this. There are more important things for our country, and it's the well-being of our country.
They're doing it now.
Yes, people are coming. That's why I say it's this transition that has taken place. It's the transition that has taken place, and that is wonderful. It's a learning experience. Of course, in a country like Saudi Arabia, we don't know what the future holds for that country. If you have any intentions of performing your Hajj, make sure you do it as soon as possible. If you have any disposable cash and you want to perform Umrah, do it quickly. Allah knows best what's going to happen there. If you think the Al Saud is bad, think about what would happen if you have an ISIS-like government there. So these may be immoral leadership, but they are somewhat, at least somewhat more accommodating. That's the irony of piety in some parts of Islam. The more pious someone becomes, the less tolerant they become. The more pious they become, the less tolerant they become. That's unfortunate. You have a question?
So,
I'll give you the last one.
okay, so comment question. So I think the comment is because we started this lecture talking about reminding us that things need to be consumable, even if there are a slight amount of people mattering. So to your fast food nation reference, I think all of us who are still here would not use the adjective poison to describe this lecture. So just talk about that. Number one. Number two, the question is, was it pedagogically intentional for you to not talk about how you talk about Maksum, but Isma went to the Sunnis versus how Isma went to the Shia?
No, I missed that one.
So could you comment on it now?
Maybe some other time, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Imam Muneer, for your time. So in the past, we've had the opportunity to meet with him on a smaller kind of scale with our book club, but inshallah, he came and we were able to fit this lecture in. And I know there were several topics mentioned in the discussion about the Sunni-Shia divide, and it's possible for me to put some pressure on Hafiz Rabbani to maybe continue these discussions in more detail. He won't get off so easily because he's here. But we just want to thank everybody for their time. There's refreshments in the back. And inshallah, this will be posted on the website or on the YouTube channel. Just give us some time to do all that. And thank you again for everyone's time. Assalamu alaikum.
Mostly disabled farmers who don't want to see the national capital.